there, welcome to this bonus episode of Channel Chat. I'm your host, Amity Shed, and today, grain marketing expert Matt Bennett and I will kind of be debriefing and digesting the August USDA supply and demand report that was released earlier today. Matt, let's start off with what jumped out to you the most about this report.
You know, the thing that jumped out to me most about the report is essentially you raised corn production significantly. First of all, you know, whenever it comes to corn, most producers were expecting for yield to come down and for planted and harvested acres to come down. And so the USDA essentially raised planted and harvested acres, raised the yield, and so obviously for corn, it was definitely a bearish report. That was probably the most surprising thing for me. And then whenever I see the soybean report, to me, was also a bit of a head scratcher. Now, they did lower planted acres for soybeans, which I would agree with. But the thing that surprised me about soybeans is they kept the yield at a 48.5 yield. For me, that's a really tough thing to believe, given the fact that we planted this soybean crop so late. To think that we're only going to be 3.5 bushels per acre below last year's record 52 bushel yield is something that I really find hard to believe.
Right. Matt, there's a lot of question when it comes to prevent plant acres. How do those play into this report?
Prevent plant acres are definitely historic. Whenever you look at prevent plant acres in totality amongst all crops, we are looking at 19.2 million acres. As far as corn is concerned, you're looking at 11.2 million acres of corn, soybeans 4.35 million acres of beans. Now, we do know the producers knew that they would get a much better payout for prevent plant corn and prevent plant soybeans, but we also know that they couldn't turn in more prevent plant corn and planted corn acres than what they had last year. And so the bottom line here is that prevent plant corn acres were just astronomically higher than anything we've ever seen. But whenever it all gets boiled down to it, the USDA is still suggesting that we planted 90 million acres of soybeans. So I think it's a little bit interesting. One thing you got to remember about prevent plant acres is that typically when they first get published, they continue to get bigger. So more of those continue to get reported as you go throughout the year. And so August would be 11.2. Who knows what September is going to be? Who knows what October is going to be? But there's no question that they're going to end up growing from where we are currently if we do anything like we've done previously.
Right. And can you shed some light on the numbers? Does this all add up? Does it make sense to you? I've seen a lot of negative reaction on Twitter. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, typically you get a negative reaction from Twitter. You see a negative reaction from producers. And I'm going to tell you that I don't necessarily agree, with what we saw today. I think that it was certainly, the type of report that you want to forget, because most producers, again, we're thinking, given the kind of weather that we had this year, it would be really tough to make the assumption that we would have similar production to what we've seen here in the last year or two. But then the USDA comes to us and says, as far as this U.S. Corn and soybean crop are concerned, we're still looking at rather large crops. And it's pretty tough to sit here and agree with that. Now, as far as the producer's perspective goes, we have to remember that the August report typically is not one in which we've had a whole lot of luck in the past. Producers have been coming into that report thinking that the crop wasn't near as big as what, it might have ended up being. And so, the August report historically hasn't been a bullish report. And so, we got to keep those things in the back of our head. That doesn't take the sting out of it by any stretch of the imagination. But for right now, I would say we've got to remember that we're very early in the marketing year. As far as total production goes, it's probably going to come down. We've got to assume that harvested acres are going to continue to come lower as prevent plant grows. And then as far as yield's concerned, it's still early in the game. But bottom line is when you plant this corn crop and soybean crop historically later than what we typically do, it's going to be really hard to get a firm handle on yields. And I think the USDA may have been a bit overly friendly to those numbers, or unfriendly as far as the farmer's concerned today.
Right. And when we're talking about the farmers, this has obviously been a really tough and turbulent season. And this report that was released this morning doesn't help them feel any better about it. So where do we go from here? What do we do from here?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And there's no question that from the producer's perspective, this was an ugly deal. It was significantly just a nasty report for us to deal with. Where does a producer go from here? Well, the first thing you got to remember is that, again, this is really early in the marketing year. The producers that made the most money selling their 2018 crop that was produced last year were the guys that waited and gals that waited, until the middle of the summer of 2019. And so you have a long marketing window. I know that a lot of producers have felt like they wanted to hold off on making sales until they knew more about their crop, given the uncertainty that we've seen here this year. But at the same time, there's no big secret that most producers, are a little bit more cash strapped after having 3 or 4 really tough income years. And so if they've held off on sales now, a lot of these guys and gals may feel definitely handcuffed, whether we're talking about old corn or new corn sales. So I know a lot of producers are still holding on to cash corn. They're hoping to see something happen here towards harvest time, especially given how late this crop is. Most people, I guess, were under the assumption that definitely had a lot of wet corn that was going to be coming to town this fall, and the elevator system was going to be wanting dry corn. So producers were really hoping to get that boost right there before harvest time. So yeah, it's very confusing. Where do we go from here? I think we have to keep our heads up and understand we're going to learn a whole lot more about this crop later. It's going to take some time for us to get a true handle on what total production is going to be. But by any means, I don't want to get scared into making a bad marketing decision just because the market's down right now. I got to remember that I've got quite a bit of time left to get this crop harvested and marketed.
Right. And for those farmers and producers that are feeling the sting a little bit more than others, what's one piece of advice you can offer them after they see this report today?
I think, as we get into harvest, we've got to remember that we want to watch some cues that the market is telling us. And so typically whenever the market gets to where they want corn more now than later, then you won't see near the spread from, for instance, December to like July corn. Right now, December to July corn is 20 cents. A lot of times you'll see a much bigger spread. This year, it looks like the market, though, is going to want those bushels maybe earlier in the year rather than later. So, as a producer who's really frustrated with what's going on, I want to watch the cues as to what the basis is telling me, what the cash market's telling me, and just try to go back to marketing 101 type lessons. And if they need help, there's people like me in the industry and others that are really good at helping producers try to figure out a best way to maximize their profit margins and minimize risk. Because in a market environment like this, the number one thing we need to remember to do is to minimize our risk as much as possible.
It sounds like it's going to be a pretty busy day for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a challenge, right now. But again, market volatility is a good thing. Lots of times whenever we sit around here and the markets don't move any over, a couple, 3 weeks, it's frustrating for producers. They like to see a little bit of market action. I know they don't want to see this today, but hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more light shed on this later on down the road. And maybe we'll see, some days like this on the other side of the coin.
Okay. Well, thanks, Matt, for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, we just got to keep our heads up. I know it's frustrating, and it's I hope that the producers that are listening to this get an opportunity to maybe catch some much needed rain. I know in our part of the world it's extremely dry, so it's especially tough on a producer that seeing these markets whenever the weather stinks. So hopefully we'll get some good weather going into harvest, and maybe we'll get a little bounce in the market at some point.